Hey, I'm Solomon J, singer, tap dancer, and guitarist, and this is a show where I like to answer all things entertainment business related. Before we dive into this session, please, if you can go ahead and hit like, subscribe, tag that notification bell so you can find out when we're doing new episodes like this. And also in the comments, if you have any questions, a lot of the topics that I talk about here are questions that I am constantly being asked. I truly mean that, and subjects that I discuss in workshops and lectures and things like that, and just trying to put some of that information out there like that. So if you have any questions or anything related to some of this stuff, or maybe some things that you don't feel like I've covered or discussed, please write those things in the comments and I'll address them, or I'll invite some other entertainment industry friends to come on and talk about some of those topics. Now, what I want to talk about today is a subject that is a little bit touchy for some people, depending on where you are. And also, it is a very necessary subject to be discussed. It came up yesterday. I was going to address this at some point, but I was with a friend yesterday who is a photographer, a friend of mine, and he was saying that when he goes and gives lectures, it's one of the things that comes up for him as well. This is the issue of having a job and seeking work outside of the entertainment industry versus going all in to the entertainment thing and just sacrificing all else, not creating a plan B kind of a situation for yourself. And it's a complicated question, and I feel like it has a couple of answers, and those answers are based entirely on where you are in your journey, in your existence, so on and so forth. But regardless of that, there's some baseline things that I think remain true no matter what. Thing number one, I'll start with the most obvious. The difference between working as an independent musician and independent entertainer, and this is true whether you are a dancer, whether you are a saxophone, trumpet player, a singer, a hip-hop artist, anything like that. When you are an independent artist, you're working for yourself. And the difference between that and somebody who may sign a huge record label, sign with a big record label, record deal, somebody who might be with a huge modeling agency or a huge agency representing you for, say, as a jazz artist or anything like that. The difference there, the reason that those deals sometimes get a sketchy reputation is because in those situations, they are covering everything. They're covering all of the legwork, at least traditionally. They're covering all the legwork. Somebody is paying for marketing. Somebody is paying for all of your branding. Instead of you having to sit there and come up with a logo or something like that, somebody's sitting together and they're brainstorming logos. And, all of these kinds of things. Merchandising, how are we going to deal with distribution here, there, around the square, as well as booking you in shows and all that kind of stuff. But the most significant part that I want to address is the aspect of the show and brand building. They're building websites, the whole nine. And when you are an independent artist, what is important to understand is that you have to do all of that stuff yourself. If you're a person who has no desire to seek out that kind of traditional deal or representation or whatever, then you have to take on all of those things yourself. And with that being the case, it's important to understand how much money it costs to create those kinds of positions and to pay those people who are doing your branding and are designing logos and are, making phone calls and all that kind of stuff and creating the show for you, maybe discussing lighting and coming up with that kind of a situation, who is, setting up set list transitions and so on and so forth, finding bands and paying musicians for rehearsals, all this kind of stuff. Now, this is not meant to be a scary thing so much as to address the reality. It can be done, but what it requires is for you to have some amount of capital. Now, I will say for my own experience, I was telling this friend of mine yesterday, the original version of the show that I pieced together, just in transparency, it cost me maybe about $6,000 to build this show. The reality is, as time has gone on, This is all I do. I am a full-time entertainer, and when I put that show, that original show together in 2013, 2014, something like that, I was still making, I would say, two-thirds of my income from entertainment. And there was still, some work that I was doing here or there, so on and so forth. But I had to realize that in order to make certain things happen, I needed the extra capital. And without somebody else to fit that bill, I needed to be my own primary investor. And nobody's going to invest in your product the way you will. And so that brings me around to this point. I found those dollars from my paychecks. And so I had this god-awful telemarketing job at one point when I was living in New York. And I had to tell myself that every penny I was making at this soul-sucking job, this is literally a job where I'm a full-time singer. Like, I sing. Singing is the number one thing on the list of things that I do. And to have people literally telling you that they hate just the sound of your voice. Like, I can't believe this. Just the noise coming out of your throat has ruined my day. That sucks. It is awful. It's awful. But the reality is, I knew that after that job was done, in the evening, I was going to pack up my guitar, and whether I was going to sit in the subway in New York or go to an open mic or all these other kinds of things, that was going to be the main thing. And I needed that other income to fund some of those endeavors. I had damage done to my guitar. I needed to repair that. I used that 9-to-5 money to pay for the repairs on my guitar. I used that 9-to-5 money to get a new pair of tap shoes. I used that 9-to-5 money to do this, that, and the other. And some people will argue, yes, you need to go all in and not give yourself a plan B. My caveat or my response to that is, I think it is possible to go all in on the concept of diving into music or entertainment and not have a 9-to-5 job be a plan B, but to have your 9-to-5 job be your means of providing capital to further build the product that is ultimately going to liberate you from this 9-to-5 experience. I know my dad had a co-worker in Houston who was also teaching with him at one point, and he was using some of his paycheck to set himself up, get some keyboard equipment and, get flyers done and promotional materials and promo reels, all this kind of stuff. And then ultimately he built a situation where he was getting called on a regular basis as a piano player to play for special events, and he sang as well, and, put together a CD, which is, in this industry, that's as big a business card, the best business card you can have. I'll discuss more on that subject later. But he pieced that together and then ultimately was able to leave that teaching job because that was what his ultimate goal was anyway. And some people might argue, well, he was teaching. Wasn't that giving himself a plan B? It depends entirely on how you look at it. You can decide that, oh, well, this means that I'm not going all in, or you can say, well, this is me funding my way out of here. All right, this paycheck, I just put this much into savings, this much went to bills, and this small sliver right here just went to getting some new business cards. Next paycheck, this small sliver right here, I'm gonna put a little bit away because I need myself a new trumpet. And that trumpet costs me $600, and all I can leverage this month, all I can cut out this month is $75. So you put that $75 there, and by the end of the year, you have enough money to pay for that new instrument. The reality is you got to play the long game, and if you can find in yourself to do that, that's where you can be ultimately successful. If you're not a person who was like, you don't have to be born into a whole bunch of money. I wasn't born into a whole bunch of money, but I hustled by way of getting that side job. I didn't like that side job. I didn't like most of the side jobs, but it's not always about what you like. Sometimes it's about what the goal is, and do you want it that badly? If you don't want it that badly, that's fine. But making excuses for yourself is not going to solve any of your problems. And so, yeah, that's a whole thing regarding that. So, do you need to have a job? Do you need to have a plan B? They are two different things. It's not about having a plan B. It's about having a means of funding your ultimate endeavor. Because the other reality is, if you're not willing to invest some of your own money into your product and have that kind of skin in the game, you can't realistically expect somebody else to want to invest in your product and put their skin in the game when you're supposed to be your biggest cheerleader. You're supposed to be your own biggest cheerleader. And if you can't set aside a dime for your own thing, it's going to be a tougher sell. And for me, my stuff might have, early on, especially, 2008, when I was really, fresh out of school, trying to start things up, it was messy. I was doing what I could. I was pulling resources, but I was doing it. I created my little website and my business cards and all this kind of stuff. I was like, cool, that's my macaroni grill check. That macaroni grill check is going right here. I'm getting us some new cards. Cool, macaroni grill check number 2 going over here. And I'm going to do this, that, and the other. I worked all those little jobs during school and right after. And little by little, I funded this whole thing that has now become a career. And obviously grateful for all the people I met along the way that could see those strides that I was making. But if you're not making those strides or even making an attempt to make those strides, you're not going to get very far. So you have to be willing to do that for yourself. Now, in terms of where you are in your life, this is where things get a little bit more complicated. Again, if you're a young person, fresh out of school, or say you are a person who you are born into a family that's like, hey, you know what? You have a little $20,000, $30,000 trust. And, some people might argue that doesn't go a long way. That's a good sum of money when you're fresh out of high school, And so, if you're a person that has that kind of a thing going on, if you have a strategy, and you can come up with a strategy. There are lots of good books and resources. If you want to message me in the comments about any of that stuff, I can give you a long litany, a good long list of resources on music marketing, guerrilla marketing, all that kind of stuff, and to help you start addressing this thing as a business while expanding your artistry. But if you have a plan, and you're very young like that, you can jump in, you can go all in, deep dive that whole thing and be like, I'm not giving myself a plan B, I'm going all in on this. I'm showing up at every open mic, I'm going to every songwriter's workshop, I'm going to every dance workshop, I'm going to every dance competition and submitting myself, all of the things, and that's what I'm doing with all of my waking hours. If you want to do that, I think that is totally valid. And if you are, say, into your 40s, 50s, 60s, age in that way doesn't negatively affect a whole heck of a lot of anything. There's a certain amount of this industry, especially this category, that I'm this middle. You're not a starving artist. You're not Beyonce or Taylor Swift. All of this stuff here in the middle, it really comes down to whether or not you can deliver. And that's not necessarily age specific. You want to be 40, 50, 60, and you're deciding you want to jump into this thing, you can, if you are set up the same way, say you've been working a salary job and you have a year of income, you are a single person at that age, and you decide you want to go all in that same way and just try your hand at it and take 365 days and make that thing happen, that's a feasible thing to do. If you want to, make that kind of, I will call it a calculated risk. Some people might call it a gamble. It's a gamble if you have no experience whatsoever and you haven't all along that way been just digging, doing little bits of research here and there. You have to do some amount of that stuff to set yourself up. But it's possible to do that thing. Now, say you are 20s, 30s, something like that, just for the sake of this conversation and example. If you are a person with a wife and a child, I believe that you are required to make your decisions a little bit differently. You got to be more calculated about this thing because you have responsibilities. And being an adult, you don't get to escape that if you're an adult. If you're here and you're ticking and you're breathing, you're an adult and you have to treat your life as such. And so in that scenario, it's even more vital to take this approach of letting your salary job fund the outside endeavor, to fund the creative endeavor. I had a teacher who was, when I was in middle school, my favorite history teacher. He was in a rock band in the evenings, and he was really passionate about teaching history, and also he was passionate about music, and he played guitar and bass, and that was his deal. If that's something that appeals to you, yeah, you can split the difference and keep those things going and keep those two aspects of your life separate and still enjoy both aspects of all of it. And if your ultimate goal is to make yourself a full-time performer, a full-time entertainer, then you can work your way towards transitioning out of whatever this salary thing is by way of making these incremental investments in yourself and in your product. Again, whether that's you want to get some outside vocal coaching, and vocal coaching can be expensive if you find a really good vocal coach. You know, if you want to take some extra guitar lessons, bass, drums, if you want to communicate with people on a regular basis about songwriting practices, because there are all of this, there's this whole myriad of stuff, and I've honestly run the whole gamut of it. I've, gone through really good vocal coaches and songwriting workshops and guitar teachers and private tap dance instructors and the whole nine. And I paid for every single one of those things with an outside salary job until ultimately I was making more entertainment income from side gigs, whether that was special events or parties and things like that. And I was using those monies to fund my further education in this thing, to reinforce skills and develop and hone new skills. And so again, if you're a person with a family, you have to make sure you're able to take care of your family. But that does not mean that you have to completely abandon the concept of having a creative outlet or transitioning yourself into a more full-time creative endeavor. And some people might argue, I've heard it over the years. It's like, oh yeah, but when are you gonna settle down and get a real job? This is my job, man. I make a big boy, I make big boy dollars doing what I do, but it's because I treat it like a business and I treat it responsibly. I have a wife, I have a son who is a toddler at that, and that is the reality of how I approach the thing. Now, granted, I am obviously a full-time entertainer already, but it's not like I wasn't in a relationship, and a serious one, or engaged or married prior to him being born. I was in all of that, and you just have to treat that thing responsibly and be willing to invest in yourself. And it makes all of those things very, very much possible. So yeah, if you have any more questions about the nature of any of that, I would love to deep dive even more specifics. If you have friends who are considering diving into something creative and they are afraid of it, or they're like, well, I want to be able to make some money from this and don't know if there's any money to be made from it. If they're thinking about just having some kind of creative outlet, I mean, there are all kinds of things. There's community theater, there are church choirs, there are local choirs. I am actually on a mini tour this spring with a group called the New Florida Follies, and they are ex-Rockettes and NFL cheerleaders, and they are about age 60, 65 and up. The oldest is 96. This lady literally comes out and does the splits in the middle of the show. They are fantastic. And are they doing this for the same income or whatever that they might have been making as Rockettes all those years ago? No, they're doing this because this is a beautiful, liberating, creative outlet, and they've decided to make time for that in their lives. That is absolutely a thing I believe anyone can do. Not only do I think anyone can do that if that's something that you're interested in, I think it's vital to do that if that's something that you're interested in, because that's the only way to maintain any kind of real peace. When you have that compulsion to create and to do something creative, you have to let that thing out and you have to cultivate that thing, or you'll always have this sense of feeling trapped in your surroundings. And I'm a firm believer in the concept of cabin fever. Cabin fever does not have to come as a result of you being trapped in a physical space. You can create these psychological walls and boundaries for yourself, and little by little, as you make a conscious decision to not actively, even in small ways, pursue the things that are vital for your spirit and your soul, these walls will just start to come in and in and in and in and in and in and in until you feel so trapped by your existence, you start lashing out at everybody because you're mad at yourself. And I don't want that for anybody. And, it's, again, for one of those reasons that I'm putting this kind of information out here for whoever might find it. Somebody will hear this, and hopefully that message speaks to you, and you can give yourself permission to at least try. Because the same things are true for writers. I mean, every creative avenue, this concept applies to all of those things. It's important to give yourself permission to try. You don't have to quit your job suddenly and just make this 180 cold turkey transition into doing something that is arguably a psychotic field. You gotta be a little crazy to want to do this thing. Incidentally, I'm a little crazy. I'm a little, I am what I am. But yeah, I think it's important, and don't let anybody try to convince you that it's not a real desire, a real valid passion, or a valid goal. It is valid. It is essential for your overall well-being. It can make you a better person. It'll make you the best version of yourself that you can be if you allow this kind of a thing to, be a part of your life. So yeah, again, any questions, comments about any kind of this stuff, please leave down in the comments, and I'm very responsive. I'll respond to these things and create more videos based on some of those questions, or if you just want to, ultimately direct message and do that kind of a thing, that's great. One more time, please don't forget to like and subscribe and hit the notification bell so you can find out when we're doing more of these things. And yeah, I'm excited for this year of doing these. I hope this lands on the ears that need it. Again, I'm Solomon J, and I will see you soon. I'm just an ordinary man, no lie. I work 9 to 5 just to stay alive. Pour me a shot, pass me another beer.